the broken calabash, an inheritance of tears and justice. My father died when I was 16, but that wasn't the day I really lost him. I truly lost him the day his brothers crossed our threshold and began to claim our home as their own, calling it family property. My name is Emeka. 12 years ago, my father, Mr. John Izu, lay silent in a velvet-lined casket in our large living room, surrounded by the scent of burning candles and funeral flowers. That night, rain hit the zinc roof of our mansion hard. My father's siblings gathered not to mourn, but to wait. My uncles, who should have protected us, were already thinking about what my father left behind. My mother, Ifeoma, sat on a low stool beside the casket, her body swaying imperceptibly, steeply with the rhythm of an internal lament. At 35, my mom was a woman whose beauty had matured into a dignified grace, now fractured by loss. My 5 siblings and I formed a constellation of shock around her. I stood rigid by the window, my jaw clenched, trying to embody the manhood thrust prematurely upon me. Obina, 14, wept openly into my mom's hands. Adaeze, 12, held my mother's arm, her intelligent eyes wide and uncomprehending. Summer, 13, and little Ogechi, 6, were a huddle of confusion on a nearby mat, enveloped in a cocoon of grief. Our ward had been reduced to the cold, polished wood of the room and the still, waxen face of the father who had lifted us onto his shoulders only a fortnight before. The mansion, once our holiday sanctuary, with Italian marble floors and wide views of Mbra's hills, now felt like a tomb full of memories. We had spent every Christmas, New Year, and August meeting there. My father built it not just as a home, but as proof that the boy from Ime Oka had succeeded in Lagos and Port Harcourt. The house was crowded with people dressed in black. Even through our grief, my father's siblings, Tochukwu, Nnamdi, Okechukwu, Chizoba, and Chinyere, and not their large families, stood out. At first, they seemed like caring relatives. Tochukwu, my father's oldest brother, with a rough voice, gave a tribute that made many people cry. John was the eagle that soared where others hopped. He remembered his roots. He built this house for all of us. Nnamdi, quieter but organized, handled the funeral details, arranging chairs and working with the drummers. Chizoba and Chinyere managed the kitchen, cooking large quantities of jollof rice, bitter leaf soup, and goat meat. They took turns comforting my mom, speaking softly and using proverbs. Chizoba crooned, wiping my mom's tears with the edge of her wrapper. He who has his property in his hand should take it to the depth. John has gone to the depths, sister. But we are here for you. The Umunna is your strength now. My mother, dazed and grieving, clung to their words like a drowning woman to driftwood. Only later, when the house emptied, would their true meaning surface. A week after the burial, the mood in the mansion changed. Only the immediate family remained. My father's siblings and their spouses now sat in the living room, not to comfort us, but as a counsel. They told my siblings to go outside and meet other children. Then my uncle Tochukwu cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the suddenly formal space. Speaking to my mom, he said, Ifeoma, his tone shedding its brotherly warmth. We have held a family meeting. We must discuss the way forward, the business, these properties. They are Izu properties. Our father's blood runs through them. My mom, still wrapped in the dark shroud of mourning, looked up slowly. Tochukwu, what are you saying? My husband built this business from scratch. I was with him. I was his general manager for 20 years. We built this house together. Another uncle, Nnamdi, leaned forward, his glasses glinting. said to my mother, "Exactly. You were an employee, a wife. But these assets, they belong to the Omunna, the extended family. It is our duty to protect our brother's legacy from external forces." The word hung in the air, external. My mother felt a cold trickle of dread cut through her grief. External forces? I am his wife. These are his children, his blood. Okechukwu, the most volatile of my uncles, slammed his palm on the glass table. You can wake up tomorrow and decide to marry that Lagos big boy from your office. And then what? Will you cart my brother's life's work to another man's house? These children are too small to run a 20 billion naira business. We, his brothers, will take custody. It is for their own good. 1 year. Their proposal was a takeover, disguised as tradition and concern. They brought out papers with my father's shaky signature, witnessed by men my mother didn't know, and affidavits from a village elder claiming my father had verbally left the business to his brothers to hold in trust. Their reasoning was secular and impossible to argue with. Tradition required it, and they were just following tradition. The execution was swift and merciless. The following Monday, Tochukwu and Okechukwu traveled to Lagos and arrived at my father's company's headquarters on Broad Street. With the forged board resolution and a hired security detail, they marched into my father's corner office. The finance director, a man who had reported to my mom for 15 years, was told to hand over all seals, check books, and access codes. When he protested, Okechukwu threatened to have thugs visit his family in Surulere. The man complied, tears of shame in his eyes. In Imeoka, Nnamdi oversaw the so-called venturi. They first opened the safe in my father's study. They took away the title deeds for land in Lekki, Port Harcourt, Abuja, and the village. Stock certificates, insurance papers, and the keys to the company warehouses all disappeared. Chizova and Chinyere, showing a kind of practiced pity that hurt more than open hostility, told my mom that the mansion, built on family land, would now be managed by my father's siblings. You understand, don't you? It is to maintain it properly. You and the children can stay for now. But it's better if you start thinking of going to your people in Enugu. A woman needs her own people at a time like this. I was boiling with anger. With Obinna, we went to Uncle Okechukwu and confronted him. Obinna started talking. Uncle, you can't do this to my mother. My father built all this for us. He hit him with a sudden and ponderous slap, snapping his head to the side. He said, "You, this foolish boy, respect your elders. You are nothing now. Without us, you would eat from dustbins. Go and sit down." The humiliation was absolute. My mother watched, powerless, as the life she and my father had built was systematically dismantled. The company cars, a Mercedes G-Wagon, 2 Prados, were driven away by the uncles. Nasisi came from banks, accounts frozen pending family resolution. A monthly allowance of 200,000 naira was instituted, a bitter, mocking charity from the wealth my mother had helped create, now delivered with a condescending lecture on budgeting from Auntie Chizoba. They drove us out not with shouts, but with a slow, suffocating squeeze. Their children flooded our rooms with noise and laughter that felt foreign. Repairs were left undone. The water pump mysteriously failed. And every day the message grew louder. We were strangers in our own home. Heartbroken, my mother gathered us and whatever little we could carry. With the secret savings my father had urged her to keep, we squeezed into a cramped, faded apartment on Izioka. The leap from marble floors to peeling paint and the drone of generators was a plunge into a new, unforgiving world. We withdrew from the prestigious private school in Lagos and enrolled in an overcrowded school in Izioka. Daisy, the most brilliant of us, returned from school the first day, her uniform torn from a fight with a girl who mocked her Lagos accent. She wept in our mother's arms. "Mommy, I can't understand the teacher. There are too many of us." Amara and Obinna cried every night for their old rooms, their toys left behind. Little Ogechi kept asking when Daddy would come back and take us home. Ikechukwu and I dealt with the trauma in different ways. I became quiet and withdrawn, spending hours looking at old vacation photos on my phone. Ikechukwu's anger turned inward, his grades dropped, and he began fighting at school. My mom's pleas to her in-laws became a desperate liturgy. She called Uncle Tochukwu, her voice filled with a mix of hope and apprehension. "I need money for my children's school fees." His response was cold and dismissive. "We sent the allowance, Ifeoma. Be prudent. That school is too expensive. Let them go to a common school like other people's children." Disheartened, my mom reached out to Auntie Chinyere, hoping to appeal to sisterhood. "Chinyere," she pleaded, "you are a mother. How would you feel if it were your children?" Chinyere's reply was clipped and unyielding. "Sister, don't put me in the middle. It is a family decision. The men have decided. We women must support our husbands." Loneliness pressed in from every side. Friends from our old life, cowed by the Izu name or paralyzed by uncertainty, faded into shadows. My mother moved through Ime Oka's markets, her proud shoulders now bent beneath an invisible weight. The nadir came during the Iriji, New Yam festival. Traditionally, our compound in the village would be a hub of celebration, with my father roasting a giant yam and distributing gifts. My mom wanted to keep some sense of normalcy for us, so she used part of our small allowance to buy a yam and some chicken. She took us to the village, not to the mansion, but to a small hut where our grandfather lived. As we tried to celebrate, laughter and music floated down from our mansion on the hill. Tochukwu played patriarch, roasting yams and handing out money in the home that was once ours. Our cousins darted through the compound in crisp new clothes, each side a fresh stick. Obinna tugged at my mother's sleeve, asking, "Mommy, why are we here and they are in our house?" My mother, wordless, gathered our food and led us back through the darkness to our apartment, tears falling silently. That night, in the stifling apartment, a new segment came on our small, static reading TV. It was a feature on the State Ministry of Women Affairs and Social Development. The commissioner, a woman named Mrs. Amaka Ibezim, with a gaze that could pain steel, was addressing a gathering of widows. This barbaric practice of disinheriting widows and their children, she declared, her voice ringing with authority, is not our tradition. Our true tradition protects the widow and the orphan. What we see today is greed masquerading as custom. It is theft. It is violence. And in our state, we now have laws. The Violence Against Persons Prohibition Law, which prevents various forms of violence against individuals, especially women and children, and the Child Rights Law, designed to ensure the right and well-being of children, are now your omono. They are your shield. Come to us. We will fight for you. Those words struck my mother like a match to dry tinder. A spark, long smothered by grief, flared back to life. For the first time in months, she glimpsed a path forward that did not require surrender. The next morning, my mom put on her only good outfit, a simple navy blue suit. She gathered us, prayed, and said, "I am going to fight for what is ours." Her voice stronger than it had been in a year. "Stay here. Be good. Pray." The State Ministry of Women Affairs was a bustling, noisy hive of activity. My mom, overwhelmed, stood in a queue for an hour, before being directed to a young social worker named Madame Chioma. In a small paper-strewn office, my mother poured out our story, not in the hysterical tears of before, but in a flat, exhausted monotone that made the horror of it even more stark. She spoke of the business, the forged papers, the slap, the eviction, the stolen school fees, and the yam festival. Chioma listened, her expression shifting from professional concern to outrage. She took meticulous notes. "Madam, this is one of the most egregious cases I've heard. And with the value involved, they are not just stealing from you. They are committing economic violence against you and your children." She picked up her phone. "You need to see Barrister Nneka Eze. She's with legal aid. She's a terror to people like your in-laws." Madam Chioma scheduled an appointment for my mom to meet Barrister Eze the following Monday. On the appointed day, my mom left early for the State Ministry of Women's Affairs. On arrival at the office, she met 2 other women with related cases that came to complain. She registered her arrival with secretary and sat down to wait for her turn. At about 10:00 am, Barrister Nneka Eze walked out of a modest office near Madam Chioma. Her presence filled the space. She was in her late 40s with intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a demeanor of coiled energy. She called my mom into her office. She listened to our story again, in addition to the brief she received from Madam Chioma, interrupting only for clarifications. The name of the bank manager they colluded with, the registration number of the truck that moved the machines from the warehouse, the date on the forged affidavit. When my mom finished, Barrister Eze leaned back, stippling her fingers. "Mrs. Izu, your in-laws are not just greedy. They are stupid. They have left a trail of evidence a blind judge could follow. What they have done violates at least 5 sections of the VDP law, 3 of the child rights law, and constitutes felony theft, forgery, and conspiracy. We will hit them with everything." Her strategy was a masterclass in legal and tactical planning. First, she helped my mom file an ex-parte motion in the High Court to freeze all the company's accounts and protect all known properties. After seeing the evidence, the court granted the order within 48 hours. Next, Barrister Eze wrote a detailed petition to the Commissioner for Women Affairs, including a file of evidence. Photos of the seized properties, sworn statements from the now brave finance director, medical reports for Adeze's stress-induced ASCO, withdrawal letters, and even the receipt for the small yam from the festival. She presented it not just as an inheritance dispute, but as a case of serious psychological harm, economic abuse, and child endangerment. Commissioner Ibeizim read the petition and summoned Tochukwu, Nnamdi, and Okechukwu to appear in her office within 1 week. On the last day of the deadline, the brothers went to the commissioner's office, arrogant in their expensive abada, expecting to negotiate with a woman affairs commissioner about family matters. They met with the Madam Chioma, Barrister Eze, 2 senior police officers, and a stenographer. Madam Chioma began by reminding them of the meeting's purpose. She went further to say, "You, Tochukwu Izu," her voice cold enough to freeze fire. "You have 6 children, I understand. Imagine coming home to find your wife dead and your brother-in-law has sold your house, withdrawn your children from school, and tells you to go back to your father's village. How would you feel?" Tochukwu blasted. "Madam, this is different. It is our custom. A woman is a woman is a human being," Ibekwe roared, slamming the dossier on her desk. "Your postum ends where the law begins. You claim to protect your brother's legacy while you starve his seeds. You are not keepers. You are hyenas feasting on your own king. By the powers vested in me, I am initiating criminal proceedings against all of you. You will also show cause within 1 week why I should not direct the police to escort Mrs. Izu back into her matrimonial home and restore every single asset. The brothers left, pale and shaken. The might of the state, wielded by a woman who refused to be cowed by their bluster, was a force they had not anticipated. The court case, Izu vs. Izu and others, became a sensation in state legal circles. On every hearing day, the courtroom was filled. On one side, we sat my mom and her children, flanked by Barrister Eze and a support officer from the ministry. On the other hand, the 5 siblings and their battery of 3 senior advocates were hired with my father's money. The father's sibling built their defense on the twin pillars of native law and custom and family stewardship. Their lead counsel, a silvery-haired CN, orated about the Igbo tradition of family property, the role of the Omunna as trustees, and the perils of leaving vast wealth in the hands of a vulnerable widow and minor children. Barrister Iza's cross-examination was surgical. She called the family's village tailor, who testified that my father had brought the fabric for my mom's wedding dress from Belgium. She called the bank manager who opened my parents' first joint account. She presented years of company board minutes signed by my mom as general manager. She played my shaky phone video at my father's 50th birthday, where my father toasted to my wife, my partner. Without you, this business is a skeleton. Adis, the teen at that time, spoke with a clarity that silenced the courts. My uncle said, my mommy is an outsider. But my daddy told me this house is for my mommy to be happy in when she is old. Obina testified about the slap. I, standing tall, described the day they took cars. My uncle Okechukwu said I was nobody, that my father's death made me nobody. Barrister Ize's closing argument was powerful. My lord, this is not a case of custom versus modernity. It is a case of truth versus falsehood, of justice versus greed. The posthume my learned friends cite is a mutant, a grotesque distortion invented to justify theft. True Igbo custom cares for widows. Here, the community, these siblings, formed a circle not to protect, but to plunder. They have not just stolen property. They have stolen childhoods, stolen educations, stolen the very legacy their brother worked for. They have committed violence against these souls. The law is not an alien concept here. It is the voice of our collective conscience, and it demands restitution and punishment. The court case took about 3 months. The day the judgment was delivered, the courtroom was tense. The judge, a venerable man with a deep understanding of both law and custom, spoke for about an hour. He methodically dismantled the defense's arguments, citing precedent and statutes. He affirmed the supremacy of the Nigerian Constitution and child rights laws over any discriminatory custom. Their defendants, he intoned, have shown a callous disregard for the welfare of the deceased's immediate family. Their actions are not stewardship, but piracy. The documents presented are forgeries. The claim of verbal will is an afterthought and a flimsy one. He granted all the reliefs sought by my mom, while full and immediate restoration of all business assets, accounts, and directorship. 2. Return of all landed properties and vehicles. 3. Permanent injunction restraining the defendants from interfering. 4. Costs awarded against the defendants. On the criminal side, driven by the commissioner's office, the wheels of justice turned. Uncles Tochukwu, Nnamdi, and Okechukwu were convicted of conspiracy, forgery, and economic/violence against persons. They were each sentenced to 7 years imprisonment. Auntie Chizoba and Chinyere found guilty of aiding, abetting, and coercive behavior, received suspended sentences and 500 hours of community service to be served at an orphanage and a widow's home. The day we reclaimed our home felt like a cleansing rain, with court bailiffs, women affairs officials, and police at her side. My mother and Barrister Eze returned to Ime Oka. My uncle's families, once so bold, now watched in silence as the seals came off and the locks turned. This time, my mother entered not as a beggar, but as the rightful owner. A deep, almost sacred silence filled the house. My mother moved from room to room, her fingers brushing the furniture and curtains she once chose with joy. In my father's study, she lingered by his old leather chair, breathing in the last traces of him. This time, her tears were not of loss, but of release. Restoration meant more than reclaiming walls and deeds. It was the beginning of our healing. With Barrister Eze and Commissioner Ibikwe's help, a board of trustees took charge of the company until I finished university, ensuring fairness and transparency. We returned to Lagos. My siblings resumed their studies, and I prepared for my exam. Therapists helped us mend invisible wounds. Our ordeal, though serene, became a lantern for others, proof that unity, resilience, and the law can turn suffering into hope and silence into new beginnings. Years later, at the New Year's festival, our mansion brimmed with laughter and warmth once more. My mother hosted a celebration, simple yet joyful. We cooked together, the aroma of roasting yams drifting through the compound. The past lingered, but it no longer cast its shadow over us. One afternoon before we returned to Lagos, my mom and I visited the family Obi, not to offer a sacrifice out of fear, but to show gratitude. We placed the fresh kola nut and a cup of palm wine. The lawyer had told us that the law was now our almoner, but in our hearts, we still felt my father's presence. My mother whispered to the wind, "John, my husband, your children are safe. Your legacy is secure." They broke the calabash, wanting to scatter its contents. But we have gathered every piece. We have mended it with gold, the gold of justice. It will hold our future. In the state ministry, Commissioner Ibikwe used the Izu case as a flagship example in her advocacy, empowering countless other women. Barrister Neka Eze continued her relentless fight, a scourge to predatory relatives across the state. Meanwhile, in a prison yard, 3 brothers, robbed of their flowing robes and false power, had endless hours to reflect on the gulf between custom and cruelty, and on the strength of a widow who, armed with the law, would not be broken. If this story moved you, please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts below. Thank you for walking beside me on this journey of resilience and justice. Your support helps shine a light on stories that matter.